Nice.
Good morning. Here comes my third safety blanket. How was your trip in?
Good.
Came in last time?
Yep. How's it going?
It's going.
Yeah.
Busy like always. Yeah. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Yeah. Busy. There. All kinds of growth.
Yeah.
There's electrical infrastructure issues.
Oh, really? Yeah. I noticed IAD is doing a lot of work on the north end
North end of India?
of their district, of their service area, let's call it.
We need substations. Well, we just won the JPA. Like we'd be able to do a surcharge just for our city and be able to get some revenue there to get some substations. But that'll probably get us 4.
No, are you in the IAD district? Okay.
That'll probably get us to 4. We probably.
Yeah.
We just had an electrical charger project that we had that left because we haven't. They wanted to put 18 chargers for us for free up there. Maybe 7 cars. Figured out. At least we got the PA going now. We'll be able to start figuring some stuff out. I think we'll be able to find some grants here because we have the PA now.
Yeah.
So we got there right on time.
Yeah, no, the more organizational structure you have, the easier it does get for some of those grants.
Yeah.
Because they see that now you are formed to do that.
Yeah. We'll see if we get
How hard was it to form the JPA?
Man, it's a long time. They bought us on it for a good 9 months probably with lawyers and everything. And finally we all agreed to what we started a year ago pretty much. They had all these different proposals and so it makes sense hard for ways. JPA is the way to go. We finally got it about a year later. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, we got it. So
Yeah,
see how it goes. Everything else good?
I think so.
Anything interesting on the agenda?
Everything, just
The outreach that they were doing, see all the different incomes that they were hitting and everything. And the responses.
very thorough.
The housing's always been going. All right, see ya.
That's your mic, and then just so
Okay.
you'll see your slides come up.
Awesome. Thank you.
Could you let them know about the clicker?
That it's sticky.
Yeah, or just to use this,
Yeah,
like
to
to advance. Yeah. And if anything changes and you just like whatever it's too much, just be like, please give me verbal cues.
Okay.
It'll when you advance, it should play. If it doesn't, I'll play.
All right. Thank you.
Good morning, Margaret.
Oh, it's not? I'll ask, right? Yeah, we do.
Morning, Rick.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Morning, Rick. This is Art.
Hi, Art. I see you front and center on my screen.
I see you too. Long time no see. Huh?
I know. We've been hitting a few meetings.
Yeah, for sure.
Hi. Good, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm good.
So pleasant
This
surprise.
man was behaving last night.
Oh, yeah.
Your not stories, your information was so interesting.
Oh, no, just no more, nowhere near yours.
Oh, no, really interesting. Rachel, he had something, as you get older, he was trying to remember a name and he says accessing information. So he brought
No, he's on it.
Yes.
He's fresh.
Well, we had his PhD. Hi, how are you doing? Good seeing you.
Good to see you.
Yes, yes. Have a good meeting. Do you know how to put the chair up? It's all the way down.
Oh, is it the latch not working?
You need a hand with it? On this side. On this side. And then this,
The lock unlock.
the back.
Oh, okay.
So that is,
All right.
you feel like you're falling around.
Okay.
Good, you good?
Thank you.
Yeah, so just lift up if you want higher.
All right, I got it.
Okay.
Cool.
I think originally, but then everything kind of worked out. So maybe not. We have a lot in person considering.
So I do know that we have some electeds that generally would not choose to cross.
Sure.
But we're not auto anymore.
But
Right.
they did not,
They
they
didn't know
made their
that until-
decision prior to today's meeting, right? And so,
Yeah.
And I guess that's interesting because in my mind, it's not crossing the picket line. If you're not going to the hotel,
That's true.
no, but listen, today's media, somebody catches you on video, they write a different subtitle, they present it and frame it in a way. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Not a problem, but somebody will be in and then I'll just hide under my area over here.
I guess I could direct the meeting because I really know. You guys are the sideshow, right?
Well, it used to be a staff that in that row.
I remember sitting here with the staff.
Yeah.
Many people got used to like, oh, that's staff side.
Yes, exactly. You're gonna start getting questions asked you about all the programs. But I might have had more.
Okay. We'll give them just a minute or so to get back to their seats and we'll get started.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's do this. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to SCAG's Energy and Environmental Committee meeting for Thursday, July 6th. I would like to ask members who are calling in by phone to identify themselves prior to the meeting or the meeting getting started. Do we have any members that need to be identified, Madam Clerk?
Vice Chair, I can confirm everyone's identified on Zoom.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to ask the Honorable Dale Whitley to please help us with the pledge.
Okay, ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. We did have a quorum at the beginning, just confirming that we still do.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Before we get going, I'd like to remind all of those participating remotely to please mute your microphones unless you are actively addressing or speaking. That way we'll cut down on some of the background noise. We are holding this meeting in compliance with the Brown Act rules relating to telephonic video conferencing meetings. SCAG offices are open for members of the public to attend and participate in person. Instructions for providing public comment have been provided in advance and are also included in the agenda packet. We already talked about the reducing the background noise. We are going to go ahead and open the public comment period of this meeting. This is a time for members of the public to offer comment for matters that are within SCAG's jurisdiction, but are not listed in today's agenda. Staff, have we received any public comment after the deadline of Wednesday, July 5th?
No public comments before or after the deadline.
Thank you. At this point, we will go to public comment. For those wishing to speak today, we'll start with in-person. Do we have anybody in chambers wishing to address public comment? Does not look like so. Do we have anybody participating at the remote locations wishing to make public comment?
I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Not at the remote locations. Do we have any virtual raised hands raised of public participants?
None.
Okay. Being none, we will go ahead and close the public comment period for matters not listed on the agenda. We will now review and prioritize agenda items. I would like to remind everybody to unmute your phones before speaking if you'd like to speak on this item, and state your name during deliberations, whether making a motion or offering a second. For those who have joined by phone, press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on the consent calendar?
Vice Chair, I'm not seeing any raised hands on Zoom.
Thank you. Do we have anybody participating at the remotely listed locations wishing to make comments?
I don't believe so. I don't see.
Last but not least, do we see any hand raised from public attending that may want to make comments on this item?
None.
None. Thank you. Okay. In order to save time, if anyone wants to pull anything from a consent calendar, we have staff present to discuss it prior to pulling it. Is there any things to be addressed on the consent calendar? Nothing online?
I don't see anything on Zoom.
Okay.
Just a quick question, Dan Brotman here from Glendale. Is it just the minutes? I believe it's
This
just
is-
minutes.
The consent calendar is item 1 for approval and receive and file 2 through 5.
Yes.
Okay, just because I wasn't here at the last meeting, I thought I wouldn't vote on the minutes, but that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Okay, before I ask for motions from this body, I'd like to call your attention to item number 2, which is the Energy and Environment Committee outlook for future agendas. I wanted to call your attention to this item to remind you and staff members of the committee's agenda, which is currently being updated for the 23-24 year. This is based on our EAC retreat last week. I will have further discussion with staff in late summer to refine and discuss priorities of the annual outlook. That's kind of our working calendar of the presentations and items that we want to look, the items we want to tackle. And so we invite you to provide input so that can definitely be put together. So if anybody has no comments or yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I just had a question about CEQA and this body's opinion about. I know that SCAG has taken a position that there needs to be reform to CEQA, and I haven't been on this committee, so I don't know. That long. So I didn't know what kind of discussions had happened with this body in terms of CEQA, since we are the committee that is concerned about the environment. I have concerns about CEQA reform. CEQA has been it's been an effective guidance for this long. I understand that there are some issues, but I just wondered if this was something that we could maybe agendize to discuss.
Thank you for that comment. I'm Sarah Jepson, the Chief Planning Officer here at SCAG. Typically, the legislative issues go through our Ledge Committee and aren't brought forward as much to the policy committees. But I think given the topic, we can have some conversation with our leadership and our legislative staff to see what we might be able to bring forward to this committee. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
I believe regional council is going to be discussing that topic later today, right?
I don't think it's on the agenda for today. CEQA streamlining. Oh, the legislative. Yeah. Yes. In the legislative updates, CEQA streamlining has been one of our legislative priorities. So we're probably reporting out on that today. Yes.
And for the topics, did you want us to give?
Go ahead.
Oh, for the topics, did you want us to give our feedback now?
You can give some. You can also submit via email, which then documents your request.
Okay, I think I've talked to Sarah a few times, but some of the things that I wanted to bring up was definitely the Colorado River negotiations and the impacts that that's going to have on the region. Not only water, but I think some of the issues that have been brought up in the Imperial Valley and Coachella Valley is dust mitigation too. Is that going to cause more air quality issues out there? Definitely would like to hear more on emerging technologies. So like any of the new battery technologies that we see coming up or hydrogen production. And then also any updates on the Salton Sea and any of the projects that are moving forward out there. That's all. Thank you.
Excellent. Elaine Lister.
Thank you. Consent calendar item 2 talks about REAP 2.0 program call for application updates. As I was reading through that, I was trying to understand. I know that, for instance, VCOG, that we have been making applications, et cetera. I'm trying to understand how it coexists in timing wise, because I know some of the groups have been making applications for funding already. Yet as I read this, it looks like they're not split, that the timeline isn't in effect yet. Or am I misunderstanding?
Well, the
what I'm reading?
exciting news is that this is outdated because yesterday the state announced that we have received our award from HCD. So we have the final approval of our application from HCD. So that was
Got it.
a key milestone that needed to happen. And now we're able to move forward with all the programs. We had some earlier acknowledgement from their staff that we were on the right path. And so that gave us confidence to go ahead and release. I think there's 6 different programs and calls for projects that we're supporting through these resources. And so each of those programs are at different phases of their rollout. So on some of the calls, the deadline has closed and we've received all the applications. On some, the calls are open right now and are closing this month. And then we have a final call that's going to open in the fall. So they're all kind of running on a little bit different schedule. And that's what's outlined in the staff report.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's
And VCOG, one of the programs is a sub-regional partnership program where the money is sub-allocated to the councils of governments. And so they are putting together their kind of portfolio of projects.
right.
So they would be working through that with all of you.
And I
through
guess
the
I was
COGs.
trying to understand in the release closing date chart, but yes, thank you. That I appreciate it.
Any additional questions? Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'm going to ask a question on the policy framework. It lists as one of the considerations for housing, affordable housing. Has there ever been a conversation at the SCAG level around what affordable means? So I'm not necessarily asking for that we have an answer on that, but it's something that we've learned that just because they call something affordable doesn't mean it's always locally affordable. In fact, it might be market rate. And so it just, as we look at the policy considerations, as that comes together, it's just something to think about.
Thank you. Okay. There seeming to be no additional comments. And if nobody wants to pull any agenda item, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent calendar agenda items, agenda item 1, and receive and file items 2 through 5.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Ortiz. I did not catch the second. Ms. Lister. Like to ask the clerk to please take a roll call vote.
Yes. Damon Alexander,
Aye.
Ana Beltran, Art Bishop,
Aye.
Daniel Brotman.
I'll abstain since I wasn't here last time.
Noted, thank you. Margaret Clark.
Aye.
Robert Copeland, Paul Courtney, Jenny Crosswhite,
Yes.
Maria Davila, Rick Dennison,
Dennison, yes.
thank you. Sherry Horn, Britt Huff,
Huff, yes.
Dan Kelmick.
Aye.
Was that Dan? Yes, thank you. Joe Kelmick,
Aye.
Elaine Lidster,
Yes.
Vianney Lopez,
Yes.
Lauren Meister,
Aye.
Cynthia Moran,
Moran, yes.
thank you. Oscar Ortiz,
Yes.
Luis Blancarte,
Yes.
Deborah Robertson, Jeanette Sanchez Palacios, Jennifer Stark. Thank you. Tamala Takahashi.
Yes.
Thank you. Connor Trout,
Yes.
Stephanie Virgen,
I will abstain. I was not present at the last meeting and it includes the minutes.
noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Del Welty.
Abstain, didn't attend last meeting.
Thank you. Edward Wilson. Okay. 1 second, Chair. This takes a minute to tabulate. So the consent calendar passes with 17 votes yes, 0 votes no, and 3 abstentions.
Thank you. Keep her on here. We'll now go on to agenda item number 6, Connect SoCal 2024 Climate Resilience. You will find this starting on page 47 of your agendas. Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? We will start by a comment for public in person here at Chambers. We seem to have none. Madam Clerk, do you see any remote locations reporting public comment?
I don't see any raised hands from any members on Zoom or the members participating remotely.
Okay, so that would be public, virtual, and remote locations, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, then at this time, I'd like to call on Ryan Wolf, Manager for Sustainable and Resilient Development, to please provide a presentation and introduce our guest speakers.
All right, thank you very much. Ryan Wolf, I'm the Manager of Sustainable and Resilient Development. This is my first opportunity to present in front of you, and you'll be seeing quite a bit more of me in the coming months, as well as one more time today. So pleasure to be here working with all of you, and please let me know how I can support your efforts as well. So today we are going to be diving into 3 presentations from some speakers on resilience. And in terms of how this fits into our overall arch on Connect SoCal 2024, just note that last month you had the policy framework update, which included the vision, goals, draft policies. That's going to be discussed at the RC today. And when the plan comes out, you will see some draft implementation strategies as well. So really the role of this discussion today is to begin having us think and begin discussing what types of implementation strategies we can do to realize the goal of a resilient, more resilient region. All right, so one thing to just note to refresh your memory is that we have our resilience definition. I won't read through the whole thing, but just note that it includes social, economic, and natural systems. So we're talking about a very broad definition of resilience and able to address climate change, changing climate, and a variety of conditions to have a sustainable and equitable future. These are some resilience and conservation subcommittee principles that came out of that process. Again, I won't read through all of them, but you can see here a lot of discussion of vulnerable populations and the relationship to climate hazards, building strong partnerships, really looking at the system and ecosystem-based approach so that we're comprehensively addressing it. And then also the concept of really having a variety of benefits. So not just focusing on the resilience component, but having co-benefits as well. And then in terms of some of the goals, again, these are in the policy framework, vibrant communities. We want diversity of housing types and affordability. So of course, we need to better talk about what affordability means, but that is in there. And then this concept of inclusive communities so that we can increase access to opportunity and address racial and economic disparities. Also from an environmental perspective on the goals, we want the resilient communities. We want to integrate the regional development pattern and the transportation network to achieve both air quality and greenhouse gas reduction goals, and then address broader sustainability. And then, of course, conserving our natural and agricultural resources, which provide us so many of our good environmental services, such as clean air, water, and those types of things. So these are your 3 speakers. I'm going to do a quick introduction of Lisa Beyer, and then she's going to do a 10-minute presentation. We'll stop there for 5 minutes of questions, and then we'll come back and I'll introduce them in succession. This should help keep us fresh in terms of the questions you'd like to ask. And also just noting that we have 2 of our speakers who have a hard stop at 10:30. So I want to make sure that you get an opportunity to discuss with them. So let me give a quick introduction to Lisa. And then we can go ahead and get into her presentation. So Lisa is a manager for urban water infrastructure at the World Resources Institute. She's responsible for developing and scaling financially innovative, environmentally sustainable municipal water management solutions in cities across the country. And the goal of this work is really to capture co-benefits of urban greening by employing advanced capital planning and integrated project delivery that can attract new investment, basically making us more secure, water resilient, those types of things. And so I'm going to hand it over to Lisa, and Lisa, I'll be advancing your slides for you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, committee members, staff, and members of the public. Thank you, Ryan and Kim, for the invitation to speak today with the Energy Environment Policy Committee on nature-based solutions for urban resilience. Next slide. My name is Lisa Beyer, as Ryan alluded, and I'm a landscape architect and urban planner. I work at the World Resources Institute, which is a global environmental and development think tank, working with governments, companies, and society to build practical solutions to the urgent environmental and social challenges we face. I support the natural infrastructure, Cities for Forests, and urban water resilience initiatives that focus on scaling investments in nature-based solutions to address urban climate resilience, but with equity in mind. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, defines resilience as preserving function, identity, and structure, while also maintaining the capacity for adaptation, learning, and transformation. And so watershed resilience is often thought about as an ability or capacity to endure a disturbance, whether from climate change or human activities, and recover. Next slide. One of the ways that WRI makes progress here is with the Cities for Forests network, which is more than 80 global cities, including Los Angeles, my home in San Francisco, all the way down to Sao Paulo, over to Nairobi, up to Oslo, and all the way south to Auckland. All these cities are committed to promoting forests and green infrastructure at 3 levels. The inner or urban forest in cities, the nearby or watershed forests that provide recreation and healthy water supply, and faraway forests that are often out of sight, but play a key role in mitigating the planet's climate health. Next slide. So we're all feeling the impacts of climate change. Events are happening more often. Next slide. Urbanization has increased impermeable surfaces and changed land uses, resulting in degraded ecosystems. So along with aging infrastructure, we're seeing unprecedented coastal and urban flooding and erosion. This is an image of Ocean Beach here in San Francisco and our famous Mission Dolores Park in a major storm, but also heat and air quality issues, especially here in California. This is an image from the San Francisco fires of 2020 and just the cloud of pollution that came into our community here. So, why does this matter? Floodplains are home to about 10 million households in the US, and by 2050, the world's coasts are expected to house about 2.4 billion people. The California floods at the beginning of this year are a reminder of this unprecedented reality and really tragic. In addition, heat-related deaths are rising. The lack of vegetation in cities and the heat trapping quality of pavement means cities are getting hotter and more quickly. 2020 was California's worst fire season on record. There was 4.1 million acres burned, which is 3 times the record-breaking acreage just 2 years before that. And we know that this is continuing with our neighbors in Canada currently, as well as the fire season just starting in the West Coast. Next slide. And it's really important to note that it's costing us, right? In 2020, NOAA had identified 22 disaster events across the US that cost $1 billion or more. And you can see the incremental or extreme rise in those costs over time along this chart, showing the various types of disasters and the total costs. So in the next slide. Through June of this year, we've already hit 9 events with over $1 billion, and that's at a total cost of $200 billion. Next slide. The types of disasters are varying across the US, right? Drought and heat are kind of occurring throughout the country. Wildfires and floods are more common in the West. The severe storms, cyclones, and flooding are happening in the East. But across America, we know that unsustainable development, rapid urbanization is exacerbating these risks and also disproportionately impacting disadvantaged communities in the areas that are historically underserved and already impacted by environmental and social burdens, along with limited financial resources. Next slide. But cities are really at the front line, housing more than half of the world's population and also contributing to about 2/3 of global emissions. Cities are the centers of innovation and new ideas. Next step, next slide. Next slide. Great. We know that nature is part of the solution, and one of the ways we have to address these climate impacts is, using nature. Ian McHarg's famous book, Design with Nature, he advocated for consideration of natural processes and development to minimize impacts and take advantage of natural infrastructure. And that's really where this movement is building from. There are a number of different terms that people use when talking about nature-based solutions. It's called natural infrastructure, blue-green infrastructure, low-impact development, green infrastructure, or engineering with nature. But basically, these are all strategies that harness natural systems' protective value and functional services to contribute to human well-being. And these solutions take the form of protecting, restoring, or sustainably managing natural ecosystems, mimicking these systems with built approaches, also called green infrastructure. These can address water security and as well as the intensifying natural hazards like flooding and extreme heat due to climate change. Next slide. Nature-based solutions are also on the agenda of the world stage. They were a big part of the UN Conference of Parties last year, and here in the US, the government's also taking notice of the power of natural infrastructure, both to mitigate against and adapt to the worst effects of the climate crisis. Next slide. Nature-based solutions use the processes found in nature to address societal challenges. So where natural ecosystems are present, they can be protected or enhanced to maximize the benefits. It's also possible to restore natural ecosystems where they've been degraded in order to recover their natural functions. And then in places where natural ecosystems are not present, often our urban areas, it's possible to build new nature-based solutions to address these resilience risks. Next slide. In urban areas, we have a number of nature-based solutions tools that can support urban resilience and sustainable development. These include protecting our existing natural lands and forests, or introducing new tree plantings and a new urban forest, promoting sustainable agriculture, or integrating open space and parks, greenways into the urban environment, restoring riparian floodplains, as well as reintroducing creeks through daylighting, integrating rain gardens that do bioretention to capture and manage stormwater, rainwater harvesting to collect and reuse water, green roofs and green walls to reduce temperatures, as well as wetlands or constructed wetlands, and especially in coastal habitats, the potential of beaches and dune restoration. Next slide. So nature-based solutions bring multiple benefits to our cities. As Ryan alluded to, they improve air quality, they help cool our cities, they absorb and filter particulate matter, which is a major contributor to pollution. They contribute to regulating the climate, they provide habitat and wildlife connections, as well as job creation, health benefits like reduced stress and recreation opportunities to increase physical activity. $1 of investment today is considered to save $6 of future avoided costs. Next slide. This table illustrates the various benefits for infrastructure from nature-based solutions. So this includes, source water protection in upland zones, flood management through forest management in the upland area, or constructed wetlands in urban areas, and even restored beaches and dunes along the coast, as well as oyster reefs, and water availability through agroforestry and sustainable agricultural practices. Next slide. You can see there are many different ways that to ensure that nature is integrated into our cities. Next slide. One of those strategies around water management for MBS is really about these kind of five key approaches: sinking it, are infiltrating stormwater to support plants, recharge groundwater, improve soil health, slowing it, so allowing it to soak into the landscape and avoiding overflows or flooding in downstream areas, moving it by conveying stormwater to areas where it can infiltrate, reusing it through rainwater harvesting to be used for landscape irrigation, washing cars, even laundry, and cleaning it, especially important in urban areas where much of our runoff gathers pollutants and ends up in our waterways. Next slide. MBS can also support extreme heat management by lightening it, right? Changing our surfaces from, sort of a gray or pavement to blue and green infrastructure, covering it by adding trees to increase shade, providing access to it, which is really important to ensure that communities have access to open space and green spaces that provide all these multi-benefits, and cooling it by, increasing the amount of landscaping overall that in turn increases evapotranspiration, which is natural cooling. Next slide. Just a couple examples of how this can look. So at the watershed or the neighborhood scale, nature-based solutions can drive community connections and multiple benefits with cost efficiency. So on the left, you're looking at Bishan Park in Singapore, designed by Draitseidel, which reintroduced a natural stormwater management as a community amenity to address flood management and ensure water independence. So instead of about $100 million upgrade to the gray infrastructure channel, they developed a naturalization of the river and park solution that cost half that and actually doubled the benefits, allowing those communities to actually connect and use that space. In Seoul, Korea, on the right, they removed an expressway that created a barrier between communities and reintroduced a historic stream corridor, the Cheonggyecheong River, as a new linear park. This green spine not only provides flood protection for the area, it also reduced temperatures by 3 to 6 degrees and air pollutants by about a third, directly benefiting the health of neighbors and visitors. Next slide. And at the site level, nature-based solutions can support park development or school development. In Atlanta, the historic Fourth Ward Park, designed by HDR, integrated a stormwater pond to manage 300-acre drainage area along Clear Creek that both reduced flooding in neighborhoods and provided irrigation water for the park's lawns and playing fields. So the initial gray stormwater solution would have cost an additional $15 million to build that underground retention tank, but instead they brought that to the surface for multiple benefits. And on the right, Sidwell Friends Middle School was designed by Kieran Timberlake and Andrew Pogan. It includes several green infrastructure technologies, including constructed wetland that manages the stormwater and wastewater from the school, a green roof that's capturing rainfall and cooling the building and the neighborhood, and native and drought-resistant plants to build habitat. Next slide. So just to close, I just want to sort of highlight, there are several keys to advancing nature-based solutions for urban resilience. It starts with understanding and awareness, really that to help set the stage for communities to work together. And the really critical step of developing a vision, who is this for? What challenges are you trying to solve? And how are you going to measure those? And nothing in this kind of work happens without collaboration. So particularly around nature-based solutions, it requires kind of overcoming siloed governance. It's multi-sectoral, right, trans-jurisdictional, and it requires that cooperation between both government and stakeholders and communities that often have different or conflicting priorities. And finally, the critical step of institutionalization. So finding ways to bring nature-based solutions into mainstream and integrated into the existing planning tools is a critical next step. Thank you for the opportunity to present today and look forward to your questions.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, Chair Robertson.
Good morning.
We are going through this item and we're having 3 separate presentations and we're taking them one at a time and stopping for discussion in between. So if you'd like to initiate discussion, we can do that now.
Good. Right here, I think I was informed that we're now at public comments, so we're going to allow for any public comments behind each presentation, right?
Correct. That's correct.
I will entertain comments from the members of the EC. And they told us, just as a reminder, if a member of this body is attending remotely but is not at a noticed location on the agenda, they may observe but may not participate in any discussion or voting of this body. And I happen to know that because I was called on that. So good morning, Margaret.
Yes, I love what you're doing because this is so important. My city is a tree city, and I want to know, I have two questions. One is, how do we join Cities for Forests? And secondly, I was able to get an ordinance. If you took one tree out, you had to put two in. This is a long time ago. And it's so important, but are you watching the state housing bills that are coming down that take away our zoning and don't provide for backyards? They want them so intense, and that is going to hurt the environment. What you've been saying, it's against what we're saying here, all the good benefits of the trees and the nature. So do you watch those bills and give input? Because we're going to be in trouble if these all get passed and we don't have any urban forest.
So I think the first part of your question in terms of how you join that initiative, is that directed at us or at Lisa?
Whoever has the information, how do I get it to my city so we join?
We can look into that and get back to you on that
Okay,
specifically,
thank you.
because I don't have that answer right now.
Right.
And in terms of the second component of the bills, we do track all of these bills and consider them. I think if there's any in particular that you are interested in discussing more, we'd be happy to do that as well. But I think that's always a consideration, and and that, I wouldn't say a balance, but the integration of housing concerns as well as resiliency concerns is something that is very important. So I would say, as you see particular bills that come up, and if you have a particular concern about any of them, we can discuss more.
Thank you.
Okay. I believe now Oscar had a question. And
thank you. Just wanted to think about, I think you mentioned at the end, Lisa, at the how it's important to institutionalize this, right, and integrate it into our current planning system. So right now we're looking in Indio at our turf removal ordinances, and in switching that up so that we're not just removing turf, but also requiring trees to be put in, right? And now we're looking at what trees do we put in, right? And which trees are native. And if there was some kind of system there where if you type in an address, it's going to give you a plant list of native plants and shade trees and instructions on how to plant in that environment, right? If you're planting out in Indio, it's going to be a lot different than planting out here. And even the way you water has to be different. So I think if we could, that'd be something great to think about and see if we can organize maybe through it, whether it's through SCAG or one of our partners, but having that kind of database for planning where somebody can type in an address and you get your plant list, planning instructions, and some kind of guidance on how to nativescape in your region. Thanks.
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Oscar. That's a great suggestion. Okay, I see I have Jenny, and then I see one more person, and then I'm going to go to those who are remotely, starting with Britt, because we are on somewhat of a time constraint. You guys shared that. So
yeah, so just real quick for the presenter is whether or not there are any cities or counties in the United States that our presenter is aware of has done this well. I know I've been to Singapore recently, and the stuff that they're doing with growing on up the sides of buildings and on top of buildings, and you're driving down a highway and you feel like you're on a little city street that's tree covered. I mean, just all kinds of amazing ways that they have implemented this, but they also have a different sort of political system they're working with. So just sort of curious if there's any examples of cities or areas in the States that have managed to start to do this well.
Okay. Go ahead and respond, please.
Thank you. Great question. And I think one of the cities that comes to mind because of the length of time they've been working to integrate this is Portland, Oregon. They have a number of different ways that they're approaching green infrastructure and different purposes. So it's they have the watershed-based approach as well as thinking deeply about green streets and building codes. The other one that comes to mind as just something a little bit different that is worth checking into and is a desert city is Tucson, Arizona. And they've done a lot of work because they have a different environment, right? It's a dry community. They have deluges of water at certain times. And so I would just suggest those as two cities. Tucson's a little less institutionalized and working on it, I think, but what they've been able to do are good models to look at. And also just to note, I'm very happy to communicate with any of you. I can provide my email for people to connect later on. Thank you.
Okay, good. And then I have Melanie.
Thank you. I just wanted to know, first of all, will the presentation be accessible to us? Because this was particularly of interest to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll make that available.
Okay, great. And then the other thing I would just say is that, we try to put through ordinances, but, politics is politics, and we have a development community that uses the state laws to basically get what they want, and they're not thinking about these types of things. So I just wonder if there's a way we can also educate the development community to start incorporating these types of things into their developments. If the state's not going to do it, then we need to find other ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving now to remote. Britt, good morning.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. Very encouraging, especially the city's forest development there. My question was regarding your early on in the presentation, the values slide on green infrastructures, interurban, and you mentioned rain gardens. Can you elaborate on what that is?
Sure. So rain gardens are sort of constructed depressions, gathering areas for stormwater to flow. So they're often used across a parking lot as an example. So as rainfall falls to the surface, it runs normally to a drain. That drain then goes either to a water body or a treatment. And a rain garden is a great opportunity to intercept that rainfall, allow it to filter through plants that are native, primarily some flowering plants, and depending on where you are located. That soil then can kind of treat some of the runoff pollutants that would come off of a roadway or parking lot before allowing it either to infiltrate directly into the groundwater table, which, in California, we're always trying to replenish our groundwater aquifers, but or be redirected and overflow into the natural drainage system. So these are really great opportunities, not just for managing stormwater, but also as pollinator gardens, right? These are important plant connections for habitat. And then also just an opportunity to remove some of that pavement and actually allow for green landscape coverage. I hope that helps answer.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And then the last, it will be Tamala, or should I say Tamala?
It's Tamala. Thank you.
All right.
Got it right the first time. Great. Thank you so much for the presentation. This is so encouraging, and I love that we're going this direction. Of course, it's a big lift, but it's important work. I have a few comments. Hopefully they'll be short. The first thing I wanted to say is to the representative from India who spoke earlier. I believe there's a bill going through the assembly right now that addresses the requirements for native vegetation and also access to a list of what's available in that area. So we can connect if you want to after we can talk about that bill. But I think that for the legislation folks, I think that's actually going through right now. So that would be super helpful for the state, for all of us. Secondly, I wanted to circle back to that example on Bishan Eng in Singapore with the waterway example, because I think that when I saw that, the first thing I thought of was the LA River. And I think that would be it's obviously a multi-jurisdiction effort to do the LA River that way, but that seems like an obvious kind of parallel. And so I'm just wondering how that would even get considered or started, to the previous person's point about working together and also a different kind of political system. And my last comment is, I noticed in a couple of the presentation portions, there was the term disadvantaged community. And I would just like to put out a little bit of a plug to possibly reconsider using disadvantaged as a term to describe communities. Disadvantage implies a passive existence, and it also implies something inherent in those communities that they're doing themselves. When actually it's policy and active actions that have caused this situation. So could we consider other descriptions such as under-considered, under-supported, over-impacted, or historically excluded? So that way it doesn't imply that there's something inherent with those areas that they are themselves doing it to themselves, and that policy does make a difference. Great. Thank you so much for listening to my comments.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Appreciate that. Now, before we go into the next one, I want to do a time check and on the items on the agenda, because I was told that we had some of our speakers remotely had some time constraints. So with that said, Sarah, would you like to redo anything that we could maybe move to?
I think we are on track.
Okay, good. Okay.
Well. So Ryan has 2 more speakers as a part of this item.
Okay, so go ahead, Ryan.
All right, I will kick it off. So the next speaker is going to be Allison Kearns, and she's the Planning and Implementation Branch Chief for FEMA Region 9 Mitigation Division. So this goes all the way to the east, Arizona, all the way to west of Guam. So it's a big area. And she's working to implement a number of grant programs, including the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, which is called BRIC, and flood mitigation assistance and high hazard potential dam rehabilitation programs. Each of these programs is really designed to help communities learn about their risk from natural hazards and take action to reduce them. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Allison, and Allison, I will be advancing your slides for you. So just tell me when you want to move forward.
Awesome. Sounds good. Yeah, so you can go ahead to the next slide. So good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for allowing us to participate today. Like it was mentioned, I work for FEMA Region 9. So I'm actually based out of Oakland, California, just a little bit north of you all. And, you know, FEMA has typically been known as a response agency. Over the past few years, there's been a real strategic shift in our approach to become a resilient agency. And we've been developing a ton of resources around preparedness, mitigation, resilience, and in particular around nature-based solutions. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you all today is a number of resources that FEMA has as an agency to accomplish nature-based solutions. So this slide again is showing that FEMA is really trying to lean into this proactive space instead of being reactive to disasters. Next slide. So here's just, and I know there's a lot of text and there's a lot of links. I'm actually going to go into each one of these, but I wanted to give you guys one slide that has links to all of the different resources that I'm going to talk about today. So I kind of categorized FEMA's resources for nature-based solutions into 4 categories. One is around some of our guidance documents, which are really useful and practical, not your typical federal, guidance documents. We also have a number of funding opportunities that we implement with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, or CalOES. We have a really neat local or best practice project that we're implementing here in California. And then I wanted to note a number of partnerships specifically that FEMA Region 9 has to implement the nature-based solutions. So next slide, the first kind of resources I want to talk about with you all are the guidance documents we have. These are actually really, and again, this is in federal speak, these are hot off the press. So the first document is a guide for local officials to look at building community resilience with these nature-based solutions. This was only released about a year, maybe 2 years ago. And because it was so successful and we got so much feedback from it, we just released a few months ago the second version, or the next evolvement of this guidance document, which we're looking at what are the strategies for success? What are the things that communities are doing that are actually making nature-based solutions work, rather than just saying how to do it? And then the third document I'm going to share with you all is actually a local project specifically to FEMA Region 9, and particularly in California. We did a project with the Nature Conservancy to look at not just what nature-based solutions are, but practically how we would apply for FEMA funding to accomplish those. I know it's one thing to say that we've got, billions of dollars of mitigation money, and then there's another part of actually being able to apply for it, specifically the technical requirements. So this document really looked at some of the nitty-gritty things like benefit cost analysis. So next slide is just a quick overview again of that first document. This is the guide, and it's a really, really useful document if you're just starting from scratch, or if you kind of have an idea, but you really want to investigate what solutions work best for your community. So this document is going to walk you through what are nature-based solutions, how do you make the business case to do these types of projects, how do you plan for them, what policies need to be enacted, and then actually, putting these projects into action, whether or not you need funding or just getting these done at the local level. There's a list of different federal funding sources, and I will say FEMA is not the only funding, agency in town. I went to a workshop about a month ago with a dozen different federal agencies specifically for nature-based solutions, and I was shocked by the number of programs that exist in every agency, from the Federal Highways Administration to the Bureau of Reclamation. There's a lot of folks who are funding nature-based solutions at the moment. So the next slide is about the second guidance document. So that first one is really walking us through, all right, here's step 1, step 2, steps 3, step 4. This document is actually looking at successes and understanding what made these projects successful. And there's some core themes across the different examples that we looked at. One is about building strong partnerships. And I think you'll find that's a common strategy for any type of project, let alone nature-based solutions. Engaging the whole community, and specifically engaging the whole community depending on the size of the project. And I appreciate Lisa did a great job of describing, how nature-based solutions can really vary in size from very local, small projects to large watershed scale projects. Looking at the benefits and really understanding how we quantify the benefits. So if federal funding or other funding programs are needed, that we can, really justify these actions. And probably the last strategy, but one of the most important ones, is not just designing these projects for our current risk, but looking at the future risk, looking at the trends for climate change, whether or not, flooding is increasing in frequency or intensity, looking at heat and how that's been changing over time, and making sure that if we're building a project, that it's not going to be, ineffective in 5 years, that it will grow in effectiveness over the next 15. So the next slide is really diving into, again, this one is the nitty gritty where we, I would recommend those first two documents if you're just, stepping your toes into nature-based solutions. This third document is really if you've got a project and you want to apply for funding, this is really going to walk you through specifically how to quantify the benefits of these projects and how to get through the benefit cost analysis. FEMA, for our grant programs, for every dollar that we grant or give, we would like to see at least $1 saved in return. And honestly, most mitigation projects save a lot more than $1 in return. However, to justify that and quantify that up front can be a pretty, difficult task to do, even with all sorts of different training and guidance. And the reason it's extra difficult for nature-based solutions is because FEMA historically has really looked at protecting people and property. And we still are very, focused on those two particular groups. However, we recognize that protecting the environment and the environment is just as important of an asset as, the people and the properties and the infrastructure that exists. So looking at how to quantify those natural benefits and really figuring out how to get through the nitty-gritty parts of a FEMA application. So the next slide is looking at some of the funding sources that FEMA has. And I will say, FEMA, some of these programs have existed for 20, 25 years now, such as the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. Some of our newer programs like BRIC for the Building a Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, these ones are relatively new, again, in federal speak, which means they're just on year 3. But I will say I have seen a shift across every single one of these programs to really step away, or at least if we're stepping away from the gray, infrastructure solution, really starting to look at green solutions as well, or, figuring out ways to have our gray and green solutions coexist with each other. In the BRIC program in particular, this is a nationally competitive program, and it actually has been quite competitive over the past few years. Though I will give a plus up to California, because for 2 years in a row now, California has been exceptionally successful with this program, and in fact has gotten 20% of the national budget each year. And right now we're waiting in about, I think, 4 weeks or so, we're going to hear some news about the next round of funding. And California submitted over $1 billion worth of projects for this competition, or this nationally competitive program. And there's only 2.3 billion available nationally. So I strongly suspect that California will be quite successful again. And I think one of the reasons why is a lot of the projects that we're seeing come through California include nature-based solutions as part of it. And that helps make a project more competitive. So every year, there's a different kind of scoring criteria for some of these competitive programs. The more you include nature-based solutions, the more you include different partnerships, and really look towards, future risk versus past or current risk. These are things that make a project, kind of stand out and be more likely to get funded. I will say for all 3 of these grant programs that are noted here, whether it's BRIC, flood mitigation or assistance, or that HMGP program, they're all administered through the Cal OES office. So we do that in partnership. And I think all 3 of these grant opportunities, in particular BRIC and FMA, I believe Cal OES has a open notice of interest period right now. And fortunately and unfortunately, there's a lot of disasters that have been occurring in the state of California. So there's also been a lot of opportunity for this post-disaster HMGP funding. I put links on all of here, and I think if you take away one thing from this, it's that we work hand in hand with Cal OES to implement this. All right, next slide. And this is my last slide for you all, is to note that, again, FEMA is not the only game in town. We have a number of different partnerships with different agencies, both federal and non-governmental, really focused on things like training, technical assistance, other funding agencies, and then also highlighting what's working, what are the best practices. And I wanted to note, one example that is a local Region 9 best practice project is called the Level Up Audio Project. It's effectively a podcast. They're 10 to 15 minute long episodes that are hosted by the Georgetown Climate Center. You can access these on Spotify, on, online, on Blueberry, pretty much anywhere you could stream podcasts. But these are local projects that are getting implemented by your peers, whether it's in Arizona, California, Nevada, or out in the Pacific. I wanted to note 2 projects that have been highlighted that involve nature-based solutions. One of them is mitigating drought with aquifer recharge projects up in Woodlands, California. And then also another good example was mitigating extreme heat in Tempe, Arizona. And they have, as a community, really invested in tree canopies and trying to bring green infrastructure into their community. So with that, I know that was a lot of information, and I tried my best to put links into everything. So these slides can absolutely be shared. So with that, I think we open it up to questions.
All right.
Thank you, Allison.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Again, I will open this up to the floor in here for questions, and then move into remote. So, Mr. Alexander, honorable.
Thank you, and thank you for the nice presentation. I appreciate it. I'm from the city of San Bernardino, and we have fires, lots of fires, great fires. So what do you suggest for mitigation concerning that kind of issue?
Yeah, so it's actually funny, we talk about bringing in a lot of different trees and green infrastructure. I will say, for fires, that's something where, native plants are obviously going to be a little bit more fire resistant, but we really encourage defensible space. So if a property has, plants and vegetation on it, keeping it so far away from the structure is really important. So it's really about how we're using our green, assets in those properties. Also, we really encourage looking at fire resistant building materials. And that's where some of the newer building codes that we're seeing come through across the entire state of California, as well as Arizona. Looking at things like, the openings to folks, vents into the attic, or looking at their roofing materials. So there's probably more on the, gray side or the built side of solutions for wildfire. But in terms of nature-based solutions, it's really about defensible space for properties and also cities. In the city of Paradise, they're building an entire defensible space that's going to exist around that whole city to ideally prevent, similar events to what occurred a few years ago.
Great.
So
One more.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. One more question is, you said flood mitigation assistance.
Mhm.
So what, in a nutshell, not to belabor the situation, but in a nutshell, what does that mean before I ask my question?
Yeah.
Does that mean infrastructure? Because it's a grant, right?
Yep.
So does that include infrastructure for that?
Yep, exactly. That one,
Go ahead.
we fund, the purpose of that program is to reduce the impact on the National Flood Insurance Program. So to have less policy or less flood claims come through. So we look at the homeowner level, we'll do elevations, acquisitions, but we'll also do large infrastructure projects as well. Looking at larger, drainage solutions or detention ponds. So that one is very similar to the other programs, but it's super focused on floods and reducing the impact to the National Flood Insurance Program.
Thank you. You answered my question.
All right, thank you. I believe on the end, Ben, did you have a question? No, okay, then Jennifer, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the really great presentation. And I'm really inspired to hear that FEMA is looking towards resiliency and avoiding these huge payouts from inappropriate, let's say, development. And so living along the hillsides, I'm wondering if the grants will also go towards like conservancies, towards land acquisition in order to preserve open space in the hillsides for in perpetuity, so that we're no longer building mansions on the hillsides that then catch on fire and then cost tons and tons of resources in claims. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And
essentially, the question is, can you use the money for purchase?
Yep, absolutely. To prevent, future building, that's the acquisition. So we can absolutely fund, if a home is in a high hazard area for flooding, fire, we can do acquisitions and keep those lands open. You'll see that often along rivers, and we'll turn those into open parks. And and those do have to stay vacant in perpetuity to prevent future damages. So yes, absolutely, for all types of hazards, we do fund that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now going to remote, Tamala, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Tamala Takahashi from Burbank. Yes, thank you for the presentation. I'm very excited to dive into those resources, look into those guides that you have produced and share the information with our city manager and staff. I do have a question though about the grants and potentially partnering with other agencies. So the city of Burbank is a very freeway and rail heavy city. And I would say that one of the challenges for our city is, for green space, is around those areas, and the communities that are near them are impacted greatly by the heavy concrete focused projects by Caltrans and Metro. So I'm wondering if any of the grants there focus on transportation areas and how we can green space the areas that are heavily focused on concrete and don't usually include trees. So we just had like a huge intersection done by Caltrans, and the entire thing is concrete, not one single piece of green in the entire project. So I'm just curious about how that might be able to help our cities or local communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do see that. So, as an example, we fund large dam projects, and very often those are very gray projects. I do think, especially for some of these competitive grant programs like BRIC, the more that you incorporate nature, so we can't necessarily enforce it, but we can certainly incentivize it. And I think that's where some of those priority points are really trying to encourage us to, we recognize that gray solutions might need to happen, but at least combining some green solutions along with them will increase chances of funding, as well as have more co-benefits associated with it. So we certainly encourage it and we incentivize it, but we can't always necessarily enforce that.
Yeah, and just a follow-up question, if you don't mind. So are those grants available to transportation agencies like Caltrans and Metro, or is it just for local jurisdictions like cities?
It is for any state government, local government, tribal nations as well. And then also for that hazard mitigation grant program, or HMGP, private nonprofits are allowed to apply as well. But yeah, so other state agencies could absolutely apply. And we've seen like California OPR has been successful with that in the past.
Okay, well, thank you. Is there anyone else that had a question? Thank you so much for the presentation. It sounds like a lot of information that we haven't tapped into. So now, Ryan, I'm back to you. Do you have a third one?
One more. Thank you very much. So our last but not least is David Sumi, and he's a resource specialist in the resource planning team of the Metropolitan Water District. I will kick it over to him in the interest of time. And David, I'll be advancing your slides for you. So just let me know when you need to move.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. Yes, my name is David Sumi. I'm a planner with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And I'll be speaking about our water shortage contingency plan, which is a state mandated plan that many of your own agencies have done yourselves. This is not our only, but by no means this is not our only plan, or necessarily even how we think about contingency planning, but this is a standard plan that many of you are familiar with. So hopefully I can kind of walk us through it and leave us with some lessons learned that Metropolitan had in kind of developing this plan and practically using it for our for our resiliency planning purposes. So next slide. So I'll just start with a quick overview of who we are and what we do. Back in 1928, the California State Legislature created us with an act, and so far we have the distinction of being the one and only metropolitan water district in all of California, and we are the largest supplier of treated water in the country. Our core function is to provide imported water to support Southern California's water needs. Like SCAG, Metropolitan is regional in our scale. Our service area covers 2,500 square miles across 6 counties. As you can see on the map, our service area extends for 200 miles down the coast, from the city of Oxnard in the north to the border with Mexico on the south. Unlike SCAG, our service area does not include Imperial County, but instead we include urban San Diego County. Like SCAG, Metropolitan is composed of member agencies. In our case, we have 26 member agencies, and we work to support the region's $1.7 trillion economy, and we have a long-standing commitment to meet the growth that is planned by SCAG and SANDAG into the foreseeable future. Next slide. So as for what we do, we provide about half of the urban water that is used in Southern California. The region obtains its water supplies from a variety of sources. Half of the region's overall water needs are met by Met's imported supplies, and these imported supplies come from Northern California via the State Water Project, and also from the Colorado River. The other half of the region's water needs are met by local supplies. My next slides will talk about the challenges for water management in Southern California. Next slide, please. It's a fun fact that California has the most variable precipitation really of anywhere in the nation. And it turns out that Southern California, even within California, has the most variation of all. Next slide. What's more, California has a population precipitation mismatch. A large portion of the population lives in Southern California, but the vast majority of the rain and snow end up in Northern California, which is a key vulnerability for our reliability. Next slide. And then, of course, droughts, they're a part of the pattern of life in the Western US. Sadly, even with a recent series of storms, there's nothing to indicate that droughts won't stay with us in the future. Next slide. On the contrary, with climate change, we expect the cycle of droughts and floods to become even more intense. Flashier floods as snow and more rain. These all mean that the ability to store and move water will become even more important. Next slide. So our approach involves actively and adaptively anticipating and balancing, real world supplies and demands. We put into practice Metropolitan's portfolio of planned supply storage programs and system facilities. We find that the main practical value of the state's let's see. Oh, so what you see here is let's see, sorry. Okay, for us to supply half of our region's water needs, we do a whole lot of planning, as you can see here. I'm well aware that SCAG does a lot of planning too. In fact, Metropolitan's planning staff, we work closely with your SCAG's planning staff, and we use your excellent regional transportation plan demographic growth forecasts as inputs into our own water demand modeling. Our plans include the urban water management plan and our water shortage contingency plan. Some of you may be familiar with your own versions of these plans for your cities and agencies. The urban water management plan is a state mandated assessment of water service reliability, and the water shortage contingency plan is a standardized action plan for droughts and shortages. Metropolitan also produces every year a regional progress report to the legislature that tracks and highlights investments in conservation, recycling, and groundwater recharge to improve our regional self-sufficiency. So all of these plans and others, they are informed by what we call our integrated water resources plan, or the IRP. The IRP is our grand strategy to identify water resources, needs, and opportunities for the region into the future. But today, with the focus on resiliency, I will be talking about the water shortage contingency plan for Metropolitan Water District. Next slide, please. So what is a water shortage contingency plan? It's something that all urban water agencies are required to have under the 2018 Water Conservation as a California Way of Life legislation. These contingency plans are included in the 2020 urban water management plans, but they are also meant to be standalone documents. The water code identifies 10 elements, but only 8 of them apply to water wholesalers like Metropolitan. Next slide. So every water provider in the state is required to have one of these in place since 2021. So what is in Metropolitan's water shortage contingency plan? In a nutshell, our plan is we built our plan as a one-stop shop documenting existing planning processes and concepts, as well as our communication protocols for communicating shortages and shortage responses. So this document, it ties them together into a consistent package. Next slide. At Metropolitan, we have adopted a pragmatic approach to water shortage contingency planning that aligns with state requirements and emphasizes adaptability to changing conditions. First, we need to make sure that we are in full compliance with state requirements, including standardized reporting, calculations, transparency, and due diligence. We duly provide the state with a mandated annual assessment that is in accordance with a prescribed next dry year scenario. However, it's important to note that Metropolitan, we don't stop there. We continually monitor and adapt to evolving conditions. And we've always done that with or without state reporting requirements. Next slide. So the water code defines 6 standard, our approach involves, now under our state guidelines, our California Water Code sets up a formula for calculating so-called shortages. And by so-called shortages, you'll see what I mean as I walk through the formula. So as we begin with demands, which in our case, as Metropolitan Water District, our demands are the projected imported water needs for Southern California. And also note that the state requirements for annual reporting ask for a calculation under a hypothetical next dry fiscal year. So this is forward-looking into a hypothetical next fiscal year, July through June, assuming that it's a very dry year. Next, we come up with an assumed core supplies for the fiscal year. And by core supplies, we mean our primary imported supplies that come to us year in, year out from our state water project and Colorado River. And next, we come up with, we take the difference between demands and assumed core supplies in the next dry year to come up with the assumed shortage in that next year. And this difference is then met with what are called shortage response actions, which are the various things that Metropolitan can do under the categories of supply augmentation, demand reduction, and operational flexibility. This formula, it seems simple and straightforward, but it's really a deceptive simplicity. The reality is that water management is much more complicated. Even though the state asks for a calculation based on a fiscal year, our imported supplies are actually accounted for on a calendar year basis. So it's a bit of working with square pegs and round holes. Each calendar begins with preliminary projections, and these data and assumptions are continually refined throughout the year. Click one more time, please. And the annual assessment report under the water code is due to the state by July 1st, which is in the middle of this calendar year. So what we end up with is really a snapshot of supply and demand conditions based on best available information according to our accounting of the current year. So really, we're kind of moving in a fog of uncertainty, but we have to by the law we have to kind of report the best we know at a certain time. Okay, next slide, please. The water code defines 6 standard shortage levels, and each level corresponds to an additional 10% of the shortage, calculated shortage. As you can see with level 1, there is an array of shortage response actions that Metropolitan can use to mitigate a shortage. And these shortage response actions, the same actions apply for each of the levels 1 through 6. These shortage response actions fall under the major headings of supply augmentation, demand reduction, and operational flexibility. Next slide. This table shows that shortage response actions it's really a combination of supply augmentation, including takes from storage and transfers, operational flexibility and demand reduction actions. But for practical purposes, which actions we take and how much of each action we would take really depends largely on how much we have available in our storage reserves. And for the most part, Metropolitan will be taking from our storage always as a first step. It's like having savings in the bank. Having plenty of water in storage lessens the need for more drastic actions. Next slide. Yeah, so this slide again shows how we are supposed to determine shortage levels by defining the difference between core supplies and demand. Next slide. But the point I wanted to leave you with is that that under this water shortage contingency plan, the state mandated plan, the shortage level is really just a number. Shortage levels 1 through 6, they don't really have a bearing on the actual impacts experienced by end users. End users, their experience really depends on the availability of shortage response actions, such as having water in storage. For example, if our storage is full, then even a level 6 shortage would not be a problem if we can meet a deficit entirely with storage reserves. But even a level 1 shortage, it could be a serious problem if our storage is depleted and we have to go into more like mandatory like cutbacks. Next slide. So under the water code, the annual water supply and demand assessment of the water shortage contingency plan is something that we and all water agencies have to go through each year to submit by July 1st. This is what I was pointing to on the calendar. Under the guidelines, it's based on the next dry fiscal year scenario, and it calculates the shortage level for that dry fiscal year, and we report on the shortage response actions to meet that shortage, which in most cases would be for metropolitan, it would be taking from our storage reserves. By necessity, these are hypothetical projections, and they are at best a snapshot based on the information we have available at the time. And because stored water and transfers are not considered core supply, but shortage response actions, there are implications for the significance and usefulness for these state mandated shortage assessments. It turns out that metropolitan will always be in a technical shortage in the annual assessment's dry year scenario, and this is because we assume that the next year will be a drought, but Southern California users, they're only ever affected if there is not enough storage to meet their imported water demands. So the takeaway is, as long as we have sufficient water in storage, we can provide regular service, and our citizens wouldn't even notice, as long as there's storage, sufficient storage. Next slide. So it's July 6th today, and we've just completed our second round of annual assessments that were due to the state on July 1st. And here I just wanted to point out that in the most recent assessment on the right-hand side, we show a 17% technical shortage before actions like taking from storage. This is a level 2 shortage. And so we're reporting to the state that we have a level 2 shortage, and this is in spite of the fact that in 2023 we currently have 100% state water project allocation. The best allocation of state water project supplies since 2006. So our core supplies are as good as they get this year, and it goes to show that under this framework we will always be showing a technical shortage under mandatory reporting, even under the best of circumstances. Next slide. And so, and when I say things are well this year, I can show you just how good it is with the chart. Then this chart shows our end of year storage balances. This chart tells you two things. First, the region has a tremendous storage capacity, and we are ending this year with a record amount of storage reserves. Second, that storage is absolutely critical to making the most of wet years like this year to be resilient against the dry years. Next slide. This is my final slide, and here I just want to leave you with some practical takeaways from that we had in developing and implementing our water shortage contingency plan. First is that we have major known uncertainties in annual water supplies, the most obvious one being the weather. So sometimes having, tying things down to like a single like indicator, like this water, like this shortage level, sometimes offers a false precision and gives misleading impressions. Dynamic and evolving situations mean that the best estimates keep changing. We found that in our experience that a prescriptive plan is less useful than an adaptive strategy. In particular, storage is vital to Southern California's strategy to mitigate risks from drought and climate change. And finally, in a region as large and populous as Southern California, spatial and accessibility considerations are really key to ensure that water can actually get to where it's needed across the vast service area. This means we need to ensure that we have enough plumbing and storage facilities in the right places to make sure that every corner of our service area can receive all the water it needs at all times. So this is my presentation, and thank you, and happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Okay, this is again an opportunity to ask questions, and starting in the room, Margaret.
Yes. Thank you very much for that presentation. My question is, I know we've had a lot of rain and we're in a good shape right now, but when we're in trouble and there's restrictions made on people, do you take into consideration people that have already been conserving? For example, if I'm rinsing the dishes before I put it in the dishwasher, I save the water, put it on my plants. Someone that is watering their lawns a day after a storm should not be rewarded and me punished. In other words, I'm just saying, for example, do you take that into consideration when you say you have to cut back certain amount? Someone that's just a guzzler, it's not going to hurt him at all. But someone that's, crazy like me shouldn't be punished. So I'm just wondering, do you take that into consideration?
So, I certainly understand the consternation that comes down to using like baselines, and it really comes down to like what time period that you would like compare someone's water use. Like, is it like before or after? Like if someone. So I would say I will say this: for Metropolitan, we are a wholesale water agency. We don't we have 26 customers.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So we don't in terms of like our programs, in terms of our like shortest response actions, if we don't have enough water to meet our imported water demands, we end up having to like allocate the water available for sale to our member agencies or wholesale agencies. We leave it up to our retail agencies to to come up with exactly how they would in turn deal with apportioning water down to customer levels. In terms of Metropolitan's water supply allocation plan, we do have a needs-based formula where we do consider agencies' local supplies and their relative dependence on Metropolitan. So agencies that have a higher dependence on imported supplies that don't have groundwater supplies, desalination, recycling, that for whatever reason they can the ones that really need our imported supplies the most, they will get a larger share. And agencies that have more developed local supplies, they're expected to step up and they will get a lesser portion of the limited supplies that we have. Yeah, we don't really we leave it to, we respect our member agencies and how they've and their relationship with their customers, and we I would say that every city, every water district kind of has their own policies as to how they implement water budgets or tiered rates, things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Lauren, and then after Lauren, Jennifer.
Thank you. So my question is, how far in advance do you actually plan? It sounds to me like you only plan a year in advance, yet cities are being asked to plan housing development for 8 years based on what the state requires. So how far in advance do you plan, and do you coordinate with the state so that the state knows whether or not you're going to be able to provide water to 2 million more housing units over the next 8 years?
I'm so glad you asked. So this water shortage contingency plan that I showed, this is a really about short-term resiliency, looking a 1 year ahead in case it's very dry. In terms of like Metropolitan's actual planning and what we actually do for our strategizing, we actually look 25 years ahead. We use something called the Integrated Water Resources Plan, which is kind of, I would say the closest equivalent would be like your own regional transportation plan, RTPSES. It's our kind of our grand strategy, looking at our projected water needs based on different assumptions. And we do this. We update this IRP, this Integrated Water Resources Plan, periodically, usually around every 5 years since 1996. We just completed our most recent IRP in this last year in 2022. Our 2020, we call it the 2020 IRP Regional Needs Assessments, and we do look 25 years ahead. And this last IRP, we undertook a scenario planning approach, and it sounds like SCAG is also looking to scenario planning. And we looked at 4 different plausible futures with different circumstances for climate change, with population growth, with regulations, to see like different scenarios of demand and supplies, and looking at the different gaps and how to meet them. We work closely with the communities to understand like where like land use, demographics, and the economy is headed. We use SCAG's, your staff's regional RTP growth forecasts as our like kind of for our modeling for demand planning. We want to make sure that we don't get ahead of SCAG. We want to make sure we follow SCAG's lead, because we don't. We want to. Our job at Metropolitan is to ensure that the economy has the water that it needs, and so we try to just make sure that we meet the growth. We don't try to induce the growth, but we want to make sure that we are prepared for the planning that is taking place by others.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Thank you so much. And thank you for that excellent answer. And one of the things that I think that we all need to do better at is being a source of good education for our communities. And I think that assuming that water is too complicated to be understood is a real mistake. And I think that when without adequate information, people then generalize what they do know and come up with assumptions that oftentimes are not based in reality. And then those assumptions get politicized, and then it just really exasperates resource management issues. So I'm wondering if Met has like a communication arm where they work with cities who are then, the cities have to do enforcement. If Met has help for information officers, and also not only with the IRP, but also with you were saying about what we really need to have is adequate storage. And over the last 20-year drought, when water kept coming out of storage, it creates a deficit, right? That I think isn't well understood by regular people. So part of my question is too, that when water is taken from storage, does that create sort of like a deficit that water needs to be put back into storage? before we consider like the abundance of water, let's say with this last weather episode.
Okay. So for the oh no, thank you for the first question about like how education like water education with the communities metropolitan has we do have extensive, we do have a process where we communicate regularly with public information officers and our conservation and conservation coordinators from all the local water agencies, and this messaging is coordinated regionally. So I'm expecting that perhaps your city's conservation coordinator is already plugged in to Metropolitan's coordination meetings. If not, or if you are interested in like that kind of information, you know, I can make sure that you can receive my my email, and I could get you in touch with those that would be happy to provide you with the materials. The second question as to like policies for our storage portfolio and like making sure that we kind of maintain our balance sheet. Yeah, this is something that we that's always ongoing. Like every month, our staff, our operations planning staff, engineering staff, we all, you know, we constantly are meeting, going over the current conditions, planning for with the current year's available supplies, looking ahead to next year's. We are in contact with our member agencies, monitoring their current trends of water use demands on our imported supplies, and so we're constantly fine tuning, updating our short-term projections. To make sure that we know where we're headed, and whenever we have a like a wet like this year, a wet year, we want to make sure that we are in communication with the DWR and State Water Project Facility operators, and to make sure that we can we don't lose any of that water, that we can make sure that all of that extra water that's coming our way, that we can put it into storage and not let it go and as little as possible. We want it, we don't want to leave anything on the table. So it's a constant like it's a constant process where we're always kind of updating our projections, and we're trying to find spaces to put things. In a year, we just came out of really the maybe with the worst drought, at least in recent history. We had the last 3 years were the 3 driest years in the state's records in California. And so we only got through that because of our storage. And so we are in a huge deficit. But as you've seen in that chart I just showed, a good year can make a huge difference, and we are taking advantage of that space, and we're filling that hole. And this is something that this is part of our business model, and this is what we've always done. And it's just getting more extreme. A little bit, it's getting harder because of climate change, but it's not a fundamental shift in our approach. It's just that it's just more effort. It's more extremes that we're seeing.
Thank you for that answer. Before we go to virtual, and I see Mayor Bishop sitting there with his hand, so I haven't overlooked, but I think our Deputy of Planning wanted to make a comment.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the comment about education and how we can play a better role in helping communities understand where the water is coming from, and whether the future growth is supported by it, or whether our future growth, we have enough water to support our future growth. And I think I just wanted to point out that this committee did adopt a resolution related to water and water resilience about this time last year. And I think we do have a really good opportunity as we release this Connect SoCal plan to address that question. It won't necessarily be in the body of the plan itself, but we can certainly do a better job of communicating what the other agencies around us do to make sure there's enough water to supply the growth that we're planning for. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think that's a role that this committee has asked SCAG to play a larger leadership role around. And I think it's something as staff we can look into. So appreciate that.
Thank you so much. That's really good to know, because it's really important that when we have these discussions about planning and building for the future, plus making up for a deficit of not doing that, I think it's really important that we have as much data so that we're not talking sort of anecdotally. So thank you so much.
Yes,
That's great, great question and a great response. And it made me think of, Sarah, we may have new members, and I don't know if they've actually had a chance to read the 9-page water
Yes, it
resolution.
is quite in depth. But we will bring that back. As we mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to be putting together the outlook for this upcoming year. And so we'll build into that schedule a recap on where we are with the water resilience and what our actions are going to be. And I do just want to note, we are a little short on time. So want to make sure we get to our other items as well today.
Yeah, and I wanted to give Mayor Bishop an opportunity to say something, and I know then Dale brought his. He's in virtual, Dale, and so if you don't mind, Art, are you're still there?
Good morning, Deborah. How are you today?
Oh, fine. Good morning.
I have a quick question for David. David, it seems like it all boils down to Southern California and the state of California having adequate water storage. Are you aware of Metropolitan Water District and or the state looking at the possibility, especially with climate changes coming in the future, looking at the possibility of more water storage on behalf of the Southern California?
This is something we are actively exploring and considering. We are Metropolitan actually is going through another long-term planning process. It's called our climate action master
Hey,
plan.
David, I hate to interrupt, but we're gonna run out of time. So it may be just a quick response about where they might look, or possibly we can provide your email and people can follow up. Would that be okay with you?
Okay, I understand. But yes, my email, is, should I give my email here or?
Well, you know what? I think we'll go ahead and send it out afterwards if that's okay.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to follow up on any questions.
Okay, and Dale, you had your card up.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I'm looking at the state reservoir board. They always talk about the river heights, and the lake heights, and the snow heights, but I don't say anything about the groundwater reservoirs. So that's just my comment. It seems like
it should be added.
Should be noted.
Thank you. Good point. All right, that's been a great, robust conversation. And I know we have one other. I will just say to our speaker, David, those of us who are not served by Met, do we get to tap into your communication plans? Because in San Bernardino, we happen to be a different wholesaler who's handling for us. So you don't have to answer. You can just put it in the chat and let me know later. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you. All right. So I think Ryan, does that conclude your presentations? So we're going to move into what's the next item that we have now?
Item 7.
Number 7.
Is up there. Ryan's presenting.
Okay, Ryan, you're still up, but we're supposed to also ask for public. Is there anyone public who wanted to speak on this item before we present? Seeing none, we're going to move right in.
Thank you very much. And I will be efficient given we're at time, but this is already going to be a high level overview. So I'm going to keep it very high level. We're very busy on this front. So just wanted to start. This is a quarterly update on the climate action resolution. I'm going to go through these couple slides quick. We all know that California is vulnerable to climate change. We've seen this recent heat wave, for example, which has been creeping across the United States, and we've been hit by it here in California in the last week. We know that heat is a big problem. We also know that these other impacts to our region are becoming more and more prevalent and impactful. Would note as well that when it comes to our vulnerability to climate change, we are one of the regions that is typically considered one of the most vulnerable, if not the most vulnerable. We have extreme heat. We have, we have inland flooding. We have our coastal limitations. So this is something that we have to be very proactive about. And while that's bad news, on that sense, the really good news is we live in a state where we're being proactive with this. We have this big regional organization where we're planning together. working together. There's lots of resources, just as Allison mentioned, all the applications for the FEMA money. We tend to be more aggressive about this, and we want to be very aggressive here at this organization as well. All of these things on this slide are things that are part of our climate work moving forward. So I'll go through each of them briefly. So regional resilience framework, this is an effort we have ongoing right now. Part of our Connect SoCal, we have worked to define resilience to better understand the impacts and disruptions related to climate change on our region, even broadly, as well as economic and social resilience. And then we are working towards identifying strategies and actually doing some scenario planning on this, so that we'll be really initiating later this year, that we'll look at our region and how we can look at different future scenarios and effectively respond to those. Next, we are engaged in collaborating with climate planning networks around the region. Most recently, we sponsored a wildfire forum at the U.S. Green Building Council in May. We also have our Southern California Climate Action Adaptation Planning Guide, and then some other resources that keep on ongoing. And so we engage in these regional networks frequently. And then upcoming, we will continue to work on education. The comment earlier about having the ability to do climate ready trees to be able to put in your address. We don't have that, but we do have some initial resources which we're putting on the website, which will provide any of our jurisdictions the ability to go on and look at the best available resources. And that will be our first step towards something more robust. This will be discussed as part of this Toolbox Tuesday on July 18th. So if you're available for that, I would highly recommend, or someone from your city, to join this, and we can follow up afterwards to discuss additional steps. As well, you're all, I'm sure, aware of the Regional Advanced Mitigation Program process at SCAG. So the opportunity here is really to do early planning to save time and money to really advance meaningful conservation outcomes. In February, the Regional Council approved the Advanced Mitigation Policy Framework and the white paper, as well as initiated the process for the SoCal Green Print. In terms of that process, July 26th will be the first meeting of the Green Print. This will be made up of staff from various entities as well as elected officials. And the idea here is to provide guidance on the data and tool development for this, and the recommendations stemming from that, and staff we anticipate those coming forward to Regional Council and this committee as well in fall of this year. And then pending approval of that approach, the Green Print development will commence with the tool development, and we will also have basically users to test it, and we'll keep you all apprised of that process moving forward. Also, we have our accelerated electrification strategy. This is really trying to move as fast, if not faster, than what the state requirements are, and includes these different components. So air quality, lowering health risks, reducing GHG emissions to both meet and exceed the targets that are outlined at the state level, and then also quarterly focusing resilience and equity. And just a couple of components of that strategy as well. We have this regional roadmap for medium and heavy duty trucking that is moving forward. And then at the previous meeting last month, you also had the presentation on the basically suitability analysis for electric vehicles as well. Another process we have is the inclusive economic recovery strategy. So this came out of COVID, and SCAG adopted the strategy, which included a number of recommendations: equity, economic development, climate readiness, inclusivity, noting as well that most of all our efforts, where they may focus on climate change as a component, they really need to be integrated into the economic and social considerations as well. So that work plan development is underway, and will be the work program expected to be completed in 2024. And related to this is the Community Economic Resilience Fund. So this is a state fund related to COVID as well. And these are its core goals: is diversifying local economies and creating sustainable industries. And then SCAG has been really tracking. There's 5 sub-regional collaboratives that have been awarded these planning grants, and we are monitoring that and supporting as needed. And then lastly, and this will conclude the update, is some of the outcomes of the Resilience and Conservation Special Subcommittee. So this is really feeding into the Connect SoCal 2024 process. We have the resilience definition, which I went over at the beginning of the last presentation. Also really recommendations to prioritize vulnerable populations and communities that are faced with climate hazards, and then building strong partnerships, which is, a core part of what SCAG should be doing, as well as applying really system-based approaches as opposed to, partial isolated processes. And then, of course, maximizing mutual benefits, so co-benefits, and those types of things. So with that, that's a very lot to go over. There's also the report in the staff report, which provides more detail. But if you have questions on any of these specific aspects, happy to, engage with you further as a follow-up. I know we're limited time, but we can obviously open up for questions.
Okay, Ryan, thank you. With that, I don't believe we have any questions. I'm looking, I don't see anybody on Zoom. We're going to move right on into the next presentation, and then we're going to defer the number 9. So number 8 is going to be presented by Leslie. And again, I don't know if there's anyone of the public who has any questions or comments before she presents, but there you go, Leslie.
Chair Robertson, just for the record, no public comments on Zoom.
I'm sorry. Thank
That's
you.
okay.
Forgot about the virtual part.
Hi. There we go. Okay, thank you, Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is Leslie Caton, and I'm an Associate Regional Planner with the Planning Strategy Department. This past spring, SCAG conducted outreach to gather in, public input on Connect SoCal 2024. And this is a critical part of the plan development process to ensure that feedback from people across the region is incorporated into the draft plan, which is scheduled for release this fall. And so for this presentation, I'll be providing a very brief update on the outreach activities and findings from this process. Now, we're going to be moving on to a video, and I just wanted to quickly check. It is less than 2 minutes. Do we have time to? Okay.
What would you like to see for Southern California by 2050? Cleaner air, less congestion, more transit, housing, and better jobs? A region that works better and is fairer and safer for all of us? What if we told you it's possible? It all starts with you. Connect SoCal is Southern California's long-range regional plan. This plan projects a vision for the future that responds to your needs. Through Connect SoCal, residents like you have a unique opportunity to have your voice heard in the process, to guide how our communities evolve. Connect SoCal meets federal and state requirements for infrastructure and sustainability planning and is led by the Southern California Association of Governments, your regional planning organization. SCAG leads the region. Our role is to outline a unified vision for achieving our region's air quality, transportation, and housing goals. We support collaboration and planning among local governments to address key issues within Southern California, serving nearly 19 million residents. We identify new ideas and innovative strategies for a brighter future. Through Connect SoCal, we create a guide to shape how Southern California communities work together in achieving our regional goals. We fund local projects, help local governments implement new plans, advocate for policies and funding, and collect data and analysis. And we want to hear from you. Will you be a part of creating a better future for Southern California? How can you be sure your voice is heard? Go to connectsocal.org to take the survey. You can also learn more about our process and ways to get involved in your area. Join us in having a positive impact on the future of our region for generations to come.
So what I just played was the digital outreach promotion video that was shared online and through our workshops. So for our outreach activities, through the outreach effort, SCAG conducted 20 in-person workshops throughout the region and 7 virtual workshops hosted through Zoom. We also hosted 20 pop-up and street team engagement events at various community events throughout the region. We also partnered with 15 community-based organizations to reach other stakeholders that historically have been difficult to reach. SCAG has also employed a robust digital and traditional advertising campaign, which directed people to the workshops and pop-up events and to also take the survey online. So this resulted in the gathering of input from more than 3,600 people across the region. So moving on to what we heard, as I previously mentioned, we heard from over 3,600 people through the survey. Of the choices provided for the question on regional challenges, the top 3 chosen by the respondents, as you can see on the slide, with the top being a shortage of affordable and diverse housing options, followed by limited reliable travel options besides driving, and climate change impacts. And so for the question regarding the vision for our region in 2050, the top 3 chosen answers were specifically healthy for all people to live in at 53%, followed by prosperous with economic opportunities for all, and safe for all modes of travel. So these comments received at the public workshops paralleled many similar themes identified through the survey responses that we received, which addresses concerns over housing affordability, transit reliability and frequency, and street safety. Now, moving on to our community partnerships, while the feedback that we received through the partnership program generally agreed with the feedback received through both the survey and workshops, the residents and respondents engaged through the 15 community-based organizations offered nuanced viewpoints, priorities, and concerns based on their lived experiences. So this draws attention to historically disinvested areas, residents and small businesses as at risk for displacement, and the desire to engage community partners in continued work after the plan is adopted next year. Now, moving on to next steps, we've updated the vision and goals based on the feedback we received, and that's shared in your agenda packets on the policy framework. And currently, staff is actively preparing the draft plan to be released this fall, and is also incorporating the feedback into draft strategies and the technical reports that will be accompanying the draft plan. And with that, that is the speedy update for the Connect SoCal.
Okay.
For the outreach, I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but
no, I don't think we really have any time for questions. I don't see any questions. And those who are on virtual, I don't see it. So I appreciate the update information. Well, Elaine has her card halfway up. Okay. Please, let's be quick on focus.
Push to speak. Super quick. I noticed you highlighted the 3 major issues, but as I read the report, the full survey results, I was concerned public transit feels unsafe was 31.29%. And I just want to be sure that that doesn't get glossed over in we want more reliable travel options. In fact, public transit feeling unsafe was higher than concern about traffic safety. And I just want to be sure we don't gloss over that finding that in all of our discussion. I realize we're not the transportation committee, but I just had to put it out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, because we've touched on that while we were at EAC, I think, our retreat, which will segue into my closing comments. But Oscar.
I just wanted to say thank you to staff. I did see the variety of people from different incomes that gave responses to the survey. Mm-hmm. And I think even the highest number was probably the most low income people that got responses. So just want to say thank you for that. That's usually not the case when we see these surveys. So appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you to our community based organization partners for that too. They were very helpful with engaging key stakeholders.
And thank you. Anyone else? No. And two, I just want to say, I'm glad you picked up Elaine, the concern. We had a conversation briefly about that, and it's of course not EEC, but still related. And then to Sarah, I wanted to say, I don't know if I saw the numbers, if we've increased in levels of participation from the prior years when, we've had not as many. It seemed like we had far more outreach going. And I don't know if it showed it in the report as well. So we can look at that later. Quickly, I know we've rushed it. I'm concluding with chair's report, and my chair. Thank you, Leslie. Chair report. Just to say a follow up on the EAC retreat. Not much comments. I think we'll further discuss it when we're in regional council. You'll hear something about it. I want to remind you guys that we are dark in August, so we will not. And then I wanted to acknowledge. I think we have 3 new members who are here with us today, and I wanted to acknowledge Honorable Jeanette Sanchez Halcicio, and also I believe we acknowledged that we had Stephanie Virgin, she's just coming in from Coachella, and Jeanette Ewan from Ventura. And then also Dale Whitley, I believe, is this your first meeting? And third meeting, okay. Sam, I have to blame that on Supervisor Picante. He identified you. I thought I'd seen you, but you know what? And then I just want to take the privilege to introduce, I have 3 environmental interns that are here with me, and I'm going to take that privilege to introduce them, partly because one has already been here previously, SCAG, and she's graduated from North Arizona University, Micaiah Harris. But I also have with me Owen Napper. Owen, if you'd stand up. And Owen has just completed his first year at UC Berkeley, and they are my environmental attorneys. He wants to be an attorney, see? And the other one is Genesis Mulligan. She just completed her first year at North Carolina A&T, where she's looking to do environmental studies with an emphasis in environmental justice. And I think also Micaiah is pursuing. We've been really looking at which law school we're going to go to together. So we haven't picked it out yet. So anyway, I wanted to have them come because they will be returning to college, back to their college at the end of this month in August, and they were dark, so they wouldn't have a chance to come to regional council. So with that, is there anything else that we need? Rachel, your comments.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Rachel Wagner, Government Affairs Officer with SCAG. I just wanted to update everyone on our Green Print Technical Advisory Committee. We are going to have our first meeting July 26th, with the second one scheduled for August 28th. And then we anticipate scheduling the third for the second week of September. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank some of our members on this committee who are participating on the Green Print Technical Advisory Committee. And we appreciate, I know Member Crosswhite, Member Clark is on it, and forgive me if I'm leaving anyone off. I don't have the list in front of me, but thank you all. And that concludes my update for the day.
Okay. Any member had any announcements that they would like to share before we adjourn? Seeing none. Okay, Sarah, that it?
I just wanted to, I did appreciate the conversation today on water and many of the questions that you all had. I wanted to point out, we also talked earlier about our REAP 2 grants, and through REAP 2, one of the programs that we have is called RUSH. And it's about the utilities that support infrastructure. And so when we release the guidelines for that program, there will be an opportunity to apply for projects that are, providing for the energy and the water and stormwater management, but you can look at that through the lens of nature-based solutions. So if these topics resonated with you today and you think your cities might be interested in exploring some resources for further planning, please reach out to me or our staff. The other thing that we're using our REAP 2 dollars for, in terms of looking at energy and housing, is looking at how nature-based solutions can reduce energy demand. And so that will be some research that's supported by our REAP 2 dollars as well. So just wanted to connect some of the presentations today with some of the resources that are going to be available through SCAG.
Sarah, will some of that be covered in Toolbox Tuesday, or how could people, the staff that we have, how could they?
Well, we'll definitely do some more outreach on the RUSH application process when those guidelines are released.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, a few minutes behind, we are Regional Council. Thank you.
And for the new members who are attending today for the first time, feel free to grab lunch in the room down when you exit on the right. So thank you.
Some change.
No, it's not. And so you highlight the ones that